Alright everybody, today we're going to take some notes on the structure of an atom. While you guys are titling it the structure of an atom, if you remember when we first started talking about matter, we said matter is all the stuff that everything is made of. But then I ask you, well, what's that stuff made of? What is matter made of? And we kind of took a look very briefly and said that matter is made up of things called elements. And elements are the simplest form something can be broken down into. And we said, well, what is an element made of? And we said, well, an element is made of an atom. And an atom is the building blocks of life. It's the smallest thing that's out there. And so we're going to take a look at that today. The structure of an atom, what an atom actually looks like. So before we do that, let's take a look at this, and you don't have to write this down. I just want to show you guys something very quickly. If you look in the upper left-hand corner here, this is something that probably looks familiar to some of you. This is gold. And so if I ask you what gold is made out of, gold is made of gold. If it wasn't made of gold, it wouldn't be as valuable as it is. So gold is made of just gold. Gold is an element. But it's made up of all these, this element of gold is made up of all these tiny little things called atoms. That's what we're going to get to today. And you look over here at this, and this picture may not look as familiar to you. This is actually carbon. And you may know that carbon is another element. And so this carbon element is just made up of carbon, nothing else, or it wouldn't be carbon. And carbon is made up of atoms, these tiny little things that make up the element carbon. And then down here we have something that people commonly think is an element, but it's not. This is water. And remember, water is actually made up of a couple elements. So this water right here is actually made up of a couple elements combined. It's made up of hydrogen and oxygen. And so when those two elements get together, it forms what's called H2O because it takes two hydrogens and one oxygen, and that's what we call water. So these are examples of elements, and you can find elements. Scientists have arranged them into this right here. It's called the periodic table. We'll also be learning about this later in the week. So we can find those elements I just talked about. The first element I was talking about was gold, and we look on here, and here's gold. It's called AU is the symbol. So AU is the symbol for gold, and it kind of tells us some stuff about gold that we'll learn later on, not today. And also, here's carbon over here, so I click on carbon, and it gives us some information on carbon. And I talked about water, which is made up of hydrogen. And it's also made up of oxygen. So those two elements can combine and make a water molecule. So let's actually get into the notes. We're going to start writing stuff down now. And so we're going to go to the first note I want you to write down, and that is element. So under chemistry, a study of matter, the structure of an atom, we need to start with an element. And we said that an element is made up of atoms. So an element is the simplest thing that there is. Gold is made just of gold. Carbon is made just of carbon. Hydrogen of hydrogen. Can go on and on. But those elements are made up of these really tiny things called atoms. And so what we got to think about is, well, how small are these atoms? Well, they're very, very small. You see the note that I have written down there. If you'll go ahead and write that down. An atom is so small that if you plucked a hair from your head, and not the length of your hair, but the width. So think that the distance across that hair, you'd have to line up 1 million atoms side by side by side to get across the width of your hair. That's really small. Another example I have is the width of this period. So if you'll write the width of this period and make a period on your paper normal size, that's roughly 2 million atoms across. So just to get across that little thing there, 2 million atoms, very, very small. Make sure we get these notes jotted down. Draw what an atom looks like. So on your paper, we're going to draw here. And so an atom pretty much looks like this. There is a center of an atom. So make you a center. Remember, these things are really, really small. And around the center of the atom, all this stuff kind of floats around it. And how scientists will kind of draw what the atom looks like. This is a very common picture that you'll find. It's got like these shells or these orbitals around the outside of it. And so we kind of get this right here. This is the typical picture you will find for an atom. Something kind of like that. The very center part of the atom right here, so if you'll, let's point to this part right here. Right here in the center of the atom is what's called the nucleus. So the nucleus is the center of an atom. Kind of think of your body as like an atom, and the nucleus of your body is your brain. Alright, so an atom actually is made up of stuff besides the nucleus. You can find things inside of an atom, and so I got a little story here to tell you. This is positive Paul, and positive Paul is our proton. Positive Paul is very positive about everything. He has a good attitude, and so that's why he's positive. You can see the sign right down here. Okay, represent positive Paul. We think of a plus sign when we think of positive. And so on your paper, in your notes, let's go ahead and write down that a proton, or positive Paul is our proton. Next note is protons. They are positively charged. So protons have a positive charge. And protons can be found in the nucleus of an atom. So if you think back to that picture we just drew, we labeled the nucleus, and inside of that nucleus you can find positive Paul, the proton. That's where he lives. And out to the side of your notes that you just wrote down about the proton, go ahead and just so you can kind of remember this, go ahead and make you a male stick figure. If you want to give him short little spiky hair, you can. Remember, he's positive, so he's always happy, so give him a smile. And if you'd like to write down positive Paul, you can write that down. Positive Paul, the proton, we're going to put the plus sign. And whenever we draw protons, we put the plus sign. You want to go ahead and circle it like that. So that represents a proton. The plus sign with a circle around it. There's a proton. So add that to your notes. A Pauli doesn't like to be alone. Alright, so he has a counterpart, and it is negative Nancy. Okay, negative Nancy represents what's called an electron. An electron is negative. And electrons are negative. They have a negative charge. And remember, protons can be found in the nucleus, but electrons, which are negative, they surround the nucleus. So they're on the outside of it. Next to your notes on electrons, go ahead and draw just to remind you, a female stick figure to represent negative Nancy. Now remember, she's negative, so we're going to give kind of not smiling there. And you want to give her some long hair. Negative Nancy. Let's see, label her that. And remember, the sign for the electron is a negative sign, like a subtraction sign. Circle around the negative sign for an electron. Remember, this symbol right here represents electron. So let's go back here, and we want to add, inside the nucleus, you can find protons. Remember, they're positive. You can find those in the nucleus. And around the outside of the nucleus, we can find electrons. So they kind of hang around out here. So we can just draw a couple out here. Protons found in the nucleus, electrons found around the outside. So we had talked about, actually, positive Paul and negative Nancy, they tend to get along because opposites attract. And well, when these opposites attract, they make an atom, like what we just drew. And so when we have positive Paul and negative Nancy and they get along, they actually make something here, and his name is neutral Ned. So positive Paul and negative Nancy, they have a kid. His name is Ned, but he's not positive like his dad. He's also not negative like his mom. And whenever you're neutral, you don't have a charge. Remember, it's a plus for a proton and a minus or a subtraction sign, kind of how you like to look at it, to represent a electron. Well, neutrons have no charge, so there's nothing to draw. Let's just write down some notes. So go up, and neutrons have no charge. Now, there is one thing that neutral Ned has in common with his dad, positive Paul, and that's that he can be found in the nucleus. So the neutrons do hang out with the protons. So like father, like son, the protons and neutrons do hang out together. You're going to draw a little kid, so maybe a smaller stick figure than the other two you drew. All right, he has no charge, so here's what we're going to do. No hair on this because he's a little baby. All right, little kid. So we're going to make a mouth kind of like that because he has no charge. There's no symbol to draw for neutron. They're just there. So you basically you would just draw a circle kind of like this. That's it. To represent a neutron, you would just draw a circle. So we now take a look kind of like our summary here, and remember, we have positive Paul, and remember, you draw a positive sign with a circle around it. So positive Paul plus negative Nancy, remember you draw a circle around the negative sign, plus neutral Ned, remember neutron is neutral, just open circle, they equal what we're going to call the atom family. So if we go back to our picture of the atom, let's add just one more thing to it. So go right down here, and we also have neutrons that can also be found in the nucleus. So they both can be found in the nucleus, and so remember, it's just an open circle. So they both hang out down here together in the nucleus, while the electrons hang around the outside of the nucleus, and that is what an atom looks like. We get, there's a much better picture than what I drew, but we get what's called the atom family. Electrons around the outside, protons and neutrons in the middle. Now some of this stuff kind of starts to make sense when we look at it. Let's go back to carbon, for example. We looked at a couple things, gold, carbon, and hydrogen and oxygen to start with. Let's look at carbon, and we look over here, and they have a picture of what a carbon atom would look like. And you would notice here in the center hangs out the protons, which they have drawn as blue, and the neutrons, which they have drawn as red, and the electrons, which they have around the outside, which they have as black. And you can notice that also oxygen, protons and neutrons in the middle, electrons are on the outside, and we'll go ahead and look at. That is what the structure of an atom looks like. I will post these notes in the video section online if you would ever like to look at them at home.